Ma'am, you need to get out of here right now. People like you don't belong here.
I have an appointment, and I was told to wait here. Besides, do you know who I am, officer? You're making a huge mistake, and I'm not going anywhere.
Ma'am, I don't care about who you are. I need to see some ID.
I ain't gonna show you a thing.
This woman made a decision that would expose the worst kind of prejudice, and it was all caught on camera. Before we continue, let me take this opportunity to thank you so much for supporting our channel. Just choosing to watch our video means a lot to us. Before we go any further, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this is your first time here. Senator Claudia Bennett checked her watch as she stepped through the revolving doors of Whitmore Tower, 1:47 p.m. She had 13 minutes before her meeting with Governor Hartfield, a meeting that had taken 3 weeks to schedule. This wasn't a courtesy visit. Claudia had come prepared with legislation that could reshape criminal justice reform across the state, and the governor had finally agreed to hear her out. The lobby stretched before her like a cathedral of glass and marble. Security nodded as she passed through the scanner. No issues. Her credentials were impeccable. 12 years as a public defender, 6 years as a state senator, and a reputation for getting things done without fanfare. "Excuse me, ma'am," the receptionist called from behind the marble desk. "You're here for—" "Senator Bennett, I have a 2 p.m. with Governor Hartfield." The receptionist's fingers moved across her keyboard. She nodded. "Yes, I see you here. The governor is running about 10 minutes behind. If you'd like to wait, the executive lounge is on this floor, just past the elevators to your right. Someone will come get you when he's ready." Claudia thanked her and followed the directions. The executive lounge was exactly what she expected. Leather sofas, abstract art on the walls, a coffee station that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She chose a seat near the window, set her briefcase beside her, and pulled out her phone to review her notes one last time. She didn't notice Officer Dale Hutchins until his shadow fell across her lap. "Ma'am." Claudia looked up. The man standing over her wore a police uniform, his hand resting casually on his belt. He was around 40, with graying hair and the kind of face that had settled into permanent suspicion. "Yes, officer?" "This area is restricted. It's for important personnel and staff only, not for people like you." The words landed with deliberate weight. Not for people like you. Claudia had heard variations of that phrase her entire life, but it never stopped stinging. She kept her expression neutral, her voice even. "I have an appointment at 2 p.m. I was told to wait here." Hutchins crossed his arms. "Told by who?" "The receptionist at the front desk." "The receptionist," he said it like he didn't believe her. "What's your name?" "I don't see how that's relevant, officer. I'm waiting for my appointment. I haven't violated any policy." His jaw tightened. "I'm gonna need to see some ID." Claudia set her phone slowly. She had been through enough encounters like this to know where it was heading. She also knew her rights. "Officer, I'm not required to show you identification. I'm not operating a vehicle. I'm not suspected of a crime. I'm sitting in a waiting area where I was explicitly told to wait." "Ma'am, if you don't comply, this is going to get a lot worse for you." Claudia met his eyes without flinching. "Worse than what, exactly?" Hutchins stepped closer. His body camera, a small black rectangle clipped to his chest, was recording everything. He didn't seem to care, or maybe he thought it would protect him. "I'm not going to ask again." "Then don't," Claudia said calmly. "I've told you I have an appointment. If you have concerns about my presence here, I suggest you verify with the front desk or with the governor's office. But I'm not showing you my ID simply because you've decided I don't belong." Hutchins' face flushed. Around them, a few people in business attire had stopped to watch. A woman near the coffee station whispered something to her colleague. No one intervened. "Stand up," Hutchins said. "Officer, stand up, now." Claudia remained seated. She kept her hands visible, her voice steady. "I'm going to ask you one more time to verify my appointment before you do something you'll regret." But Hutchins had already made his mind. He reached for his handcuffs. Everything that happened next was captured in perfect, undeniable detail. Hutchins grabbed Claudia's arm and pulled her to her feet. She didn't resist. She knew better than to give him any excuse to escalate further. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can sit wherever you want." He twisted her arm behind her back. The metal cuffs clicked around her right wrist. A security guard in a gray uniform rushed over from the elevator bank. "Officer Hutchins, what's going on?" "Found this woman trespassing in a restricted area. She refused to identify herself." The security guard looked confused. "Sir, this lounge isn't restricted. Visitors waiting for appointments use it all the time." Hutchins ignored him and secured the second cuff. "She got an attitude when I asked for ID. That's obstruction." "Obstruction of what?" Claudia asked. Her voice was still calm, but her heart was pounding now. Not from fear, from anger she couldn't afford to show. "I told you I have an appointment. I gave you an opportunity to verify it. You chose not to. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. And you don't get to detain people because you don't like the way they look." That was the line that did it. Hutchins' face went red. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "You think you're smart? You think you're special? People like you always think the rules don't apply." "People like me," Claudia repeated. She turned her head slightly, making sure the body camera caught her face. "Say what you mean, officer." Hutchins stepped back and grabbed her by the elbow. "You're under arrest for trespassing and obstruction of justice." The security guard held up his hands. "Officer, I really think we should call upstairs first. If she has an appointment—" "She doesn't." "How do you know that?" The guard looked genuinely distressed now. "Did you check?" Hutchins didn't answer. He started walking Claudia toward the elevators. She didn't fight him. She kept her head up, her steps measured. Around them, more people had stopped to stare. A woman with a briefcase held up her phone, recording. Hutchins barked at her to put it away. She didn't. They reached the elevator. Hutchins pressed the button for the ground floor. The security guard followed them inside, still protesting. "Officer Hutchins, I really need you to wait. Let me just call the governor's office. It'll take 2 minutes." "I'm not waiting." The elevator doors closed. The three of them stood in tense silence as the numbers descended. Claudia caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. A woman in a tailored black suit, hands cuffed behind her back, flanked by a cop who had decided her guilt before she ever opened her mouth. She spoke without looking at Hutchins. "You're going to regret this." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened, and Hutchins marched her out into full view of everyone passing through. Business people, delivery workers, tourists taking photos of the building's famous atrium. Claudia kept her chin up. She refused to look ashamed for something she didn't do. The receptionist saw them and stood up so fast her chair rolled backward. "Oh my God, Senator Bennett?" Hutchins froze. "Senator?" The receptionist came out from behind the desk, her face pale. "Officer, what are you doing? She's here to meet with the governor." Hutchins' grip on Claudia's arm loosened slightly. "What are you talking about?" "She's Senator Claudia Bennett. She's on the governor's calendar. I checked her in myself 20 minutes ago." The security guard from upstairs had followed them down. He stepped forward, his voice tight. "I tried to tell you." Hutchins looked from the receptionist to Claudia to the growing crowd of onlookers. His confidence wavered for the first time, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "She didn't identify herself." "Because I didn't have to. And you didn't ask who I was. You assumed. I asked for your ID. After you'd already decided I didn't belong. Tell me, officer, what exactly about me made you think I was trespassing?" Hutchins said nothing. His jaw worked, but no words came out. The receptionist looked horrified. "Officer, you need to uncuff her, right now." She was uncooperative. She was sitting in a waiting area doing exactly what I told her to do. The receptionist's voice was shaking now, but she didn't back down. "You need to let her go." Hutchins hesitated. The body camera on his chest was still recording. Everyone in the lobby was watching. A man in a suit had his phone out, filming. There was no way to undo what had already been done. Slowly, Hutchins reached for his keys and unlocked the cuffs. Claudia brought her hands forward and rubbed her wrists. She didn't need to. The damage was done, and everyone in that building knew it. Hutchins stepped back, but he didn't apologize. He couldn't. Apologizing would mean admitting he was wrong, and men like him never admitted they were wrong. "You should have just shown me your ID," he muttered. Claudia looked at him with something close to pity. "I shouldn't have had to." The receptionist was already on the phone, speaking quickly to someone upstairs. Her face had gone from pale to red. She kept glancing at Claudia, mouthing the words, "I'm so sorry." A woman in a sharp navy pantsuit emerged from the elevator. Her name tag read, Victoria Lyles, Executive Assistant to the Governor. She took one look at the scene and her expression hardened. "Senator Bennett, I am so deeply sorry. The governor is ready for you now, but if you need a moment—" "I'm fine," Claudia said. She picked up her briefcase from where Hutchins had set it on the reception desk. "Let's not keep him waiting." Victoria turned to Hutchins. Her voice dropped to ice. "You will stay here. Do not leave this building. Do you understand me?" Hutchins opened his mouth, then closed it. He nodded. Claudia followed Victoria to the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw Hutchins standing in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by stares and whispers. His hand drifted to his body camera, as if he'd just remembered it had been recording the entire time. Upstairs, Governor Hartfield was waiting in his office. He stood when Claudia entered, his face a mixture of concern and anger. "Senator Bennett, I just heard what happened downstairs. That is absolutely unacceptable." Claudia set her briefcase down and took a seat. "It's not the first time, Governor. It won't be the last." "That doesn't make it right." "No, it doesn't." They talked for 90 minutes. Claudia presented her criminal justice reform proposal. The governor listened, asked questions, and by the end of it, he'd agreed to back the legislation. It was everything she'd come for. But as she rode the elevator back down, all she could think about was Hutchins' hand on her arm, the cold metal of the cuffs, the way he'd looked at her like she was something to be removed. The lobby was quieter now. Hutchins was gone. A different officer stood near the entrance, a younger man who wouldn't meet her eyes as she passed. Claudia walked out into the afternoon sun and got into her car. She sat there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. Then she pulled out her phone and called her chief of staff. "Nathan, it's me. Something happened today. I need you to file a formal complaint with the police department, and I need you to request the body camera footage from Officer Dale Hutchins, badge number—" "Hold on." She pulled out the business card the security guard had given her before she left. "Badge number 2847. I want that footage, and I want it on record." Nathan's voice came through worried and sharp. "Claudia, what happened?" "I was arrested today, Nathan, in the Whitmore Tower, for sitting in a waiting area while black." There was a long silence on the other end. "Get me that footage, Nathan, and get me a lawyer." The story would have ended there for most people. A complaint filed, an internal investigation that went nowhere, maybe a quiet reprimand behind closed doors. But Claudia Bennett wasn't most people, and Hutchins had made a critical mistake. He'd left his body camera on. 3 days later, the footage leaked. No one knew who released it. Some said it was a sympathetic officer in the department. Others claimed it was a whistleblower in city IT. It didn't matter. Once it hit the internet, it spread like wildfire. The video showed everything. Hutchins approaching Claudia, his tone, his words, his assumptions, her calm responses, his refusal to verify her appointment, the moment he grabbed her arm, the receptionist's horror when she realized what was happening. And worst of all, it caught what Hutchins had muttered under his breath as he walked her to the elevator, words he thought no one else could hear. "Uppity woman thinks she owns the place." The city erupted. By the end of the week, protests filled the streets outside Whitmore Tower. News vans lined the block. Reporters camped outside the police station. Civil rights organizations demanded action. The mayor called an emergency press conference, and Dale Hutchins was placed on administrative leave. But Claudia wasn't satisfied with that. She'd spent 12 years as a public defender watching the system protect officers who abused their power. She'd seen too many complaints swept under the rug, too many victims ignored. Not this time. She hired a legal team and filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Hutchins and the city. The charges were clear: unlawful detention, racial profiling, violation of her Fourth Amendment rights, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The city offered to settle quietly. Claudia refused. "I want a trial," she told her attorney. "I want it on record. Every word, every second of that video. People need to see what happens when officers think they're above accountability." The attorney nodded. "Then that's what we'll do."
Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The trial began 4 months later in federal court. The prosecution's case was devastating in its simplicity. They didn't need to argue or interpret. They just played the body camera footage. The courtroom went silent as Hutchins' voice filled the space. His dismissive tone, his refusal to listen, the way he'd grabbed Claudia's arm without justification. And then the words that sealed his fate. "Uppity woman thinks she owns the place." The jury watched without moving. Several jurors shook their heads. One woman in the back row wiped her eyes. Hutchins sat at the defense table, his face blank. His attorney had advised him not to show emotion, but it didn't matter. The video showed everything his expression tried to hide. The prosecution called witness after witness. The receptionist testified that she had personally directed Senator Bennett to the executive lounge. The security guard confirmed that the area wasn't restricted. Victoria Lyles, the governor's assistant, described the scene she'd walked into: a sitting state senator in handcuffs for the crime of waiting for an appointment. Then came the expert witnesses. A former police captain testified about proper protocol and how Hutchins had violated it at every turn. A civil rights attorney walked the jury through the patterns of racial profiling and how this incident fit a textbook definition. But the most damaging testimony came from Hutchins' own department. An internal affairs investigator took the stand and revealed something the public didn't know yet. This wasn't Hutchins' first complaint. Over his 19-year career, he'd racked up 17 formal complaints, 12 of them involving people of color. Most had been dismissed or resulted in minor reprimands. One involved a black teenager he'd detained for looking suspicious outside a library. Another involved a Latino man he'd stopped for driving erratically, who turned out to be a pediatric surgeon heading to the hospital. The pattern was undeniable. Hutchins' attorney tried to argue that his client had been doing his job, that he had reasonable suspicion that Senator Bennett's refusal to show ID escalated the situation, but every argument fell apart under cross-examination. "Did Officer Hutchins verify with the front desk before detaining my client?" the prosecutor asked. "No." "Did he ask for her name before demanding ID?" "No." "Did he have any evidence she was trespassing besides his own assumption?" "No." The defense rested after 3 days. They had nothing left. Claudia took the stand on the 5th day of trial. She wore the same black suit she'd worn that afternoon in Whitmore Tower. She answered every question with the same calm precision she'd used with Hutchins. "Senator Bennett, why didn't you tell Officer Hutchins who you were right away?" Claudia looked directly at the jury. "Because I shouldn't have to recite my credentials to justify my existence in a public space. I'm a state senator, yes, but even if I wasn't, even if I was a student, a janitor, or someone visiting a friend, I had every right to be in that waiting area. The receptionist directed me there. I had an appointment. Officer Hutchins never asked about any of that. He saw me and decided I didn't belong." "Why do you think he made that decision?" "Objection," the defense attorney called. "Calls for speculation." "I'll rephrase," the prosecutor said. "Senator Bennett, in your professional experience, both as a public defender and as a legislator, have you seen similar incidents?" "Yes, dozens of them, and they almost always follow the same pattern.
Someone in authority makes an assumption based on appearance, refuses to verify the facts, and then justifies their actions after the fact. The only difference this time is that I had the resources and the platform to fight back. Most people don't. The courtroom went silent. "What do you want from this trial, Senator?" Claudia took a breath. "I want accountability, not just for me, but for everyone who's been profiled, detained, humiliated, and dismissed by people who are supposed to protect them. I want Officer Hutchins to understand that the badge doesn't give him the right to treat people as guilty until proven innocent. And I want a system that actually holds officers accountable when they abuse their power." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. Hutchins showed up in his suit instead of his uniform. He'd aged since the trial began. His face was drawn, his shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked like a man who understood the consequences of his actions. The judge didn't hold back. "Officer Hutchins, you were given a badge and the public's trust. You violated that trust repeatedly and systematically. This wasn't a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. The evidence shows a pattern of behavior rooted in prejudice and contempt for the very people you swore to serve." She sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison for violating Senator Bennett's civil rights under color of law. With good behavior, he might serve 15, but his career was over. His pension was gone, and his name would forever be attached to one of the most clear-cut cases of racial profiling caught on camera. The city settled with Claudia 3 weeks later for $2 million. The mayor issued a public apology. The police department announced mandatory bias training and policy reforms. But Claudia knew that money and apologies didn't undo what happened. They didn't erase the feeling of handcuffs on her wrists or the way Hutchins had looked at her like she was nothing. What mattered was that this time the system had worked. Not perfectly, not quickly, but it had worked.
Senator Claudia Bennett stood at a press conference 6 months after the sentencing. Behind her were representatives from the ACLU, the NAACP, and families who had lost loved ones to police violence. The reforms she'd fought for, the ones she'd been on her way to discuss with the governor that day, had passed with bipartisan support. Mandatory body cameras for all officers, independent review boards for misconduct complaints, a state database tracking officers with patterns of abuse. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. A reporter raised her hand. "Senator Bennett, do you feel justice was served?" Claudia paused before answering. "Justice is complicated. Officer Hutchins will spend the next 15 to 20 years in prison. That's accountability. But justice also means prevention. It means changing the systems that allowed an officer with 17 complaints to keep his badge for 19 years. It means making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone who doesn't have a title or a platform or the resources to fight back." Do you think this case will change how police interact with communities of color? I think it sends a message that actions have consequences. But one case doesn't fix a broken system. This is about culture, training, accountability, and the willingness to admit when we failed people. Real change takes time and constant pressure. Another reporter called out, "What would you say to Officer Hutchins now if you could?" Claudia looked directly into the camera. "I'd tell him that what he did wasn't just wrong, it was a betrayal of everything law enforcement should stand for. But I'd also tell him that his actions exposed a truth this country still struggles to face. Bias doesn't just live in policies or laws. It lives in assumptions, in quick judgments, in the belief that some people belong and others don't. Until we confront that honestly, we'll keep having these conversations." The press conference ended, and Claudia returned to her office. On her desk was a stack of letters, some from supporters, some from critics, and some from people sharing their own stories of being profiled, detained, or dismissed. One letter stood out. It was from a young woman named Jasmine, a college student who'd been stopped by police 3 times in a single semester for fitting a description. She wrote, "Thank you for not staying quiet. Thank you for fighting. Because of you, I know my story matters too."
Claudia folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with dozens of letters like it. She thought about Dale Hutchins sometimes, not with anger, but with something closer to sadness. He'd thrown away his career, his freedom, and his reputation because he couldn't see past his own prejudice. He'd looked at a woman in a tailored suit sitting quietly in a waiting area and decided she was a threat, and it cost him everything. But the real cost wasn't just his. It was the trust eroded between communities and the officers meant to protect them. It was the fear people carried when they saw a badge. It was the exhaustion of having to prove your humanity over and over again. The $2 million settlement went into a foundation Claudia established to provide legal support for victims of police misconduct who couldn't afford representation. She'd kept none of it. Money couldn't undo what happened, but it could help others fight back. 3 years later, Claudia was invited to speak at a police academy graduation. Some people thought she shouldn't go, that her presence would be seen as antagonistic, but she accepted anyway. She stood before a room full of new officers and told them the story, not to shame them, but to remind them of the weight they carried. You're about to walk into situations where split-second decisions matter, where you'll have to assess people quickly and act decisively. But I'm asking you to remember that the person in front of you is someone's daughter, someone's father, someone's future. Don't let assumptions guide your actions. Don't let bias cloud your judgment. Because the moment you put on that badge, you take an oath, not to your own comfort or your own fear, but to justice. The room was silent. Some officers looked uncomfortable. Others nodded slowly. One young officer raised his hand. "Senator, do you think officers like Hutchins represent the majority?" Claudia shook her head. "No. I think most officers join because they genuinely want to help people. But good intentions aren't enough when the system protects bad actors. It's not enough to be a good cop. You have to be willing to call out the bad ones. That's how trust gets rebuilt." After the speech, several officers approached her. One, a black woman in her late 20s, shook Claudia's hand with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I needed to hear that. I've been questioned more times in this uniform than I ever was out of it. People see the badge and assume I'm on the wrong side. But I'm here because I want to be part of the change." Claudia squeezed her hand. "Then be that change. We need you." As she drove home that evening, Claudia thought about how far things had come and how far they still had to go. Hutchins was in prison. The reforms had passed. The conversation had shifted. But every week she still heard stories. Another traffic stop that escalated unnecessarily. Another young man detained for walking in the wrong neighborhood. Another family left to wonder if their loved one would make it home. The fight wasn't over. It never really would be. But that afternoon in Widmore Tower, the moment Hutchins put those handcuffs on her wrists, proved something important. It proved that silence changes nothing, that power without accountability is tyranny, and that justice, when demanded loudly enough, can break through even the strongest walls of indifference. Claudia pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment in the quiet. She thought about the 19-year-old version of herself, fresh out of law school, idealistic and determined to fix the world. She'd learned since then that the world doesn't get fixed in a single case or a single law, but it gets better, one fight at a time, one voice at a time, one officer who chooses to see humanity instead of a threat. That was enough to keep going. So here's the question. Do you think 20 years was justice, or should the consequences have been different? What would you have done in Senator Bennett's position? Would you have fought publicly or handled it quietly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story made you think, hit that like button and subscribe. We need to keep telling these stories. They matter. Thanks for watching.